Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I realize we're running a little short on time this morning and trying to get through a few things, but I would like to offer my comments on Bill 1 at third while I have an opportunity. We have had a lot of interesting perspectives on this topic over the last couple of months of debate, and I've learned a lot. I haven't agreed with everything the government's done. I certainly haven't agreed with everything on the opposition side. You know, we have had some brief discussions amongst ourselves in Caucus and with our research team, and we've gone back and forth on exactly what our perspective is on this bill. You know, and one interpretation is that it'll create a boon of oil and gas jobs in Calgary, where those management decisions are made, and in Edmonton and rural Alberta, where the petroleum is extracted and processed. But there's another interpretation, and that is that the bill grants the minister remarkable extraordinary and really arbitrary power to hand out royalty credits and grants, as the member from Fort McMurray Wood Buffalo talked about previously in the preamble of the bill, talking about those royalty credits and grants, and other financial tools that are made available to this government and this minister, without, I believe, appropriate transparency or accountability. It's very clear the minister has said that she prefers the Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission, APMC, frankly, to work in secret from most Albertans. And I don't understand how keeping that knowledge from Albertans really strengthens Team Alberta or our economy. Now, the Alberta Party supports the general principle of energy diversification, but we certainly have questions and more than that, concerns about this bill and the NDP's approach. So I would say that Bill 1 really is a story about missed opportunity. We understand that it's prudent to build on the energy resources we have, but we know that that we can do better in the face of the undeniable global shift towards new energy and new transportation technologies. Now, one of the most important aspects of this bill, of course, is that it comes out of the Alberta's Energy Diversification Advisory Committee, or EDAC. Now, EDAC acknowledges that oil and gas may not always be primary to the global economy, and that there is a transition coming. So I'm going to spend a bit of time just reviewing some of the key recommendations that EDAC made that didn't find their way into this bill. And when we really started digging into those recommendations, much as the government has touted the fact that this bill is an outcome of their work, there's a lot that EDAC suggested and recommended that never showed up in the bill, and that's a grave concern to us. I'm going to start on their executive summary on page 6. They report that there's 6 signs the global energy system is transforming. 1, the sheer volume of clean energy technologies being developed and adopted. 2, rapidly declining cost curves for new technologies, which suggest adoption will begin to accelerate even faster over the next decade or 2. 3, the evolution of the power grid, which will be needed to handle the additional demands of an electric economy. 4, new business models that add new value for consumers and change the way we live and work. 5, changes in policy at the global, national, and provincial level in response to the climate change challenge. And 6, acceptance by Canadians that global energy system is changing, with continued support for energy development, while also favouring policies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and speed up the energy transition. Now, this bill completely ignores recommendation 2.1 that the government of Alberta transform Invest Alberta, which is an agency, into a world-class organization that has the capacity to secure multi-billion-dollar projects when competing with the best investment agencies in the world. It sounds like a winner when it comes to making commitments to new energy, and certainly that would have been handy when the Fed successfully negotiated for the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Really, what that speaks to is the fact that there's a tremendous amount of capital available for energy projects, both traditional energy and new energy, and Alberta's doing a very poor job. In fact, we're seeing a significant flight of capital away from the province of Alberta and away from Canada, which is a great concern to our province in particular and to our country as a whole. Now, recommendation 2.3, EDAC recommends the agency have access to a dedicated, robust diversification fund that would provide clarity to the business community on the kind of support available from the province that would enable the agency to effectively execute on its investment attraction strategy. Now, that sounds remarkably like the Alberta Party's shadow budget pledge to spend $100 million more in economic diversification and trade investments than the government proposed themselves in this most recent budget. Again, a story of missed opportunity. Recommendation 2.4 explicitly empower a different body than the APMC, which in this government and this minister is also ignored. the recommendation is the agency be structured similar to the APMC. It should take a more strategic direction from government, but to promote transparency, efficiency, and a long-term view, the agency should ultimately be structured at arm's length, with a mandate in alignment with government policy to negotiate and recommend deals for final government approval. A governing board with clearly defined financial authority should provide oversight that would minimize the risk of political interference, which is a significant risk. So we also feel we can do better by following the committee's observation that it is inefficient to task experts and professionals in petroleum with figuring out how to do energy beyond petroleum. And EDAC then goes on to make several recommendations concerning how the government should structure its investment, regulatory and resource management, and transparency policies. There's that word transparency again, and mechanisms, all of which are ignored in this bill. We absolutely can do better if this government had chosen not to ignore EDAC's recommendations. Their recommendation number 4, also missing, is particularly telling since it would have the greatest potential to actually create new sustainable jobs. EDAC supports the concept of establishing new infrastructure and energy corridors around existing or likely sites for downstream energy clusters, in particular Alberta's Industrial Heartland, Joffre, Grand Prairie, and Medicine Hat. We can do better by supporting new infrastructure that sustain investment and growth, not just infrastructure that expands what we're already doing. Recommendation 5. EDAC recommends that the Government of Alberta ensure the hydrocarbon value chain remains a strategic priority within the innovation funding system. That whole hydrocarbon value chain, even in an evolving world and an evolving energy economy, will continue to drive value for the province of Alberta for the core products that we produce. So it's not just us recommending that the government develop an innovation funding strategy and that ministers start working together instead of continuing in silos. We've talked a lot in many different contexts about knitting together different government departments. We agree with EDAC that a modern innovation ecosystem needs to be supported and expanded in a long-term innovation fund that is, quote, independent from political and budgetary cycles, which is stated in recommendation 5.5. That, I think, is probably the single biggest issue for this government and, frankly, all governments in this province to grapple with, and that is those making agencies and decisions that are going to be independent from those political and budgetary cycles, from the winds of political whim. Recommendation 5.2 from EDAC highlights the skills gap this government has not been able to address, despite what we've seen here in Bill 1 and also in Bill 2. EDAC says, successfully bringing technologies from conception to commercialization requires a unique skill set, pairing technical talent with financial skills and business acumen. EDAC recommends the Government of Alberta optimize its system and programs to support both the technical and business development aspects of innovation. That feels a little bit like the challenge that we had in attracting Amazon in terms of not just having the business acumen, but also the technical skills. Now, in the petroleum industry, we certainly do have the technical skills, but they've talked about pairing those things up. And again, there's really very little in this bill that addresses that directly. Supporting the intersection of technical and business skills does seem like something local grassroots collaborations like Evolve U could address. We can do better for Albertans if this government would agree to work with partners instead of taking years and years to roll out their own solutions. Finally, recommendation 5.3 highlights the regulatory barrier to actually getting innovation into the field. And again, this bill fails to address that challenge. EDAC recommended that the Government of Alberta create an enabling mechanism within the regulatory framework to provide the necessary flexibility and speed to properly test technologies at scale in the field. Now, some of those sorts of things are happening. We see the work going on at the Shepard Power Plant outside of Calgary to repurpose carbon. Those are the kinds of things I would have hoped to see in this bill, but aren't there. Recommendation 7.2 is missing. EDAC recommends the Government of Alberta continue to lead on advocacy for equitable rail services that address the need of downstream industry players in regards to access, cost, reliability, and active participation by downstream energy industry representatives. There's a lack, surprisingly enough, of proper GBA plus consideration in forming this bill and ignores completely recommendations 6.1 through 6.4, which include recommendations about explicitly including Indigenous communities in energy diversification and also working with the federal government. This has become both a challenge and an opportunity with the Trans Mountain Pipeline. So this government's own metrics of implementing the EDAC recommendations, the bill fails on almost every count. So we've tried through our amendments in committee to amend the bill so it aligns more closely with those EDAC recommendations. And even with the limited and short-sighted scope this government has chosen, regrettably, The government has chosen to ignore most of that EDAX report and most of the opportunities for the opposition side, and the Alberta Party in particular, to improve the bill. And so is that with great regret that I see this bill as such a tremendous missed opportunity that we simply cannot support it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.